meeting and it will be recorded. Thank you so much for starting that, Avery. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Casey Beck, and I am a grant program coordinator here at the Oregon Criminal Justice Commission. The plan for today is to provide you all with a very quick update on the Restorative Justice Grant, and then to turn this over to Grant Advisory Committee members for discussion and action around additional funding that was received in the most recent legislative session. I also wanted to note that the chat feature has been turned off for this meeting so that we can capture all discussion as part of the recorded meeting. If you have any questions, please direct them towards me. But we'll go ahead and show the anticipated meeting schedule here. As I mentioned briefly, this is going to be a super quick meeting. We only have 30 minutes today, 26 of which are left, if you're counting like I am. And we have some important action to take care of regarding additional funding and what recommendations to make for the commission. So we're going to pause and take roll. Let's see here. To the screen. I believe we are still one Grant Advisory Committee member short, but we'll just go ahead and run through it. For my committee members, if you are here, please say that you are when I call your name. Tristan Edwards.
I'm here.
Aaron Knott.
Present.
Shannon Wilson.
Here.
Carrie Naughton.
Here.
Thank you, Carrie. Vanessa Timmons.
I'm here.
Simon Fulford.
Present.
Elaine Walters.
Elaine, we didn't hear you, I think. You're on mute.
I'm here.
Thank you so much, Elaine and Simon. Jimena Ospina-Todd. Okay. Michael Kaiser. And Ashley Beatty was excused, so we were not expecting her to make it. We unfortunately do not have quorum yet. I will just hop into this. And then let's see, Avery, I know, oh, sorry, go ahead.
I think we do have quorum, exactly.
Yep, you're right. My account was wrong. Thank you, Avery. Appreciate that.
You're welcome.
All right, hopping into it then. So let's get back to okay, so we are going to pause briefly for public comment. We have a whopping 2 minutes reserved for this. If you are a member of the public here today and wish to make a comment about the agenda, please feel free to do so now. Unmute yourselves. If we don't have anyone chime in, I'm going to move on so we save time for discussion. But if you are a member here and would like to say something, now is your time.
I just say thank you as always and appreciation for the folks on the committee, as well as everyone who's done so much for RJ across the state and the legislative push. I know you all were working, around the clock. So just a lot of appreciation. Glad that this funding's going through again and super excited to see what coming years bring.
Thank you, Miles. I'm not seeing any other hands raised. Okay, so we will push on. Wanted to provide a quick refresher for the Restorative Justice Grant, since it has been a while since we have met virtually, especially as a grant advisory committee. It's been great to see all your faces again. So the Restorative Justice Grant Program was established by House Bill 2204 back in 2021. Restorative justice here, as defined in the bill and in OARs, excuse me, not as defined in the bill, but as defined in OARs. Restorative justice means a community-based alternative to the criminal and juvenile legal systems that aims to center the needs of the harmed party and foster accountability within the responsible party without resorting to incarceration or criminal conviction. As part of that bill passing, there was $4 million appropriated in 2021, which was through a competitive process granted to these folks listed on the slide. For grant advisory committee members, I did want to note, you will see that there are now only 7 instead of 8 grantees. The Cow Creek Band of Umpqua Tribe of Indians notified the CJC back in October that they had been awarded funds from a different source that fulfilled their monetary needs, and they returned nearly all, I think it was $59,000 and change of their $60,000 award back to the CJC. They had not used it. And so I just wanted to note that as there are now 7 grantees as part of this smaller cohort instead of 8. And it's also worth noting that the current project period was set to end in December of last year, 2023, and here we still are. So many grantees opted in for extensions of project period through June 30th of this year, 2024. And there are 2 grantees on this slide who actually requested extensions through December 31st of this year, 2024. So as we orient you to that space, the exciting news, hopefully you've heard, is that recently in the short session of 2024, House Bill 5204 appropriated an additional $4 million to the Restorative Justice Grant Program for use in our biennium right now, the 2023 through 2025 biennium. This does mean that funding needs to be out the door by June 30th of this biennium, so next June 30th, 2025, which kind of limits our ability for project period for July 1st of this year, 2024, through June 30th of 2025. That's a quick, short 12 months. However, the CJC is able to permit 1 quarter or 3 months extension through September 30th of 2025, should programs need so. Today, to be discussed by the Grant Advisory Committee are things like, what do you want to do with this money? Do you want to prioritize existing programs? Do you want to consider capacity building requests from existing programs? Do you want to open it to new applicants in some manner? Additional consideration factors I wanted to highlight for you all were that many, I would say the majority of existing grantees that currently hold the Restorative Justice Grant are running out of their funding, their current award, as early as this June. We have 5 of the 7 grantees who are on track to be spent completely by June 30th of this year, which was also the conclusion of their project period. Another consideration is that some existing grantees are no longer in their planning phase. So should they be given an opportunity to request additional funding, it may not look like the same request they had 2 years ago when they were just requesting money to plan. They're now piloting, they're now operational. So those asks may be larger. And I just wanted to highlight again, a limited project period. This is 12 months of funding that should be, taken into consideration, especially when thinking about opening this up to new applicants. That is not a lot of time to get a new program up and running. I have 3 paths forward to present to you all today. I will go through them all in detail, then we'll pause and I'll hand it over to you all for discussion. The first one is to prioritize existing programs only. What this looks like could be capacity building requests. So not only are programs maintaining their current service level, wherever that may be, but maybe those planning grants, are now full pilots or fully operational. They could, have a greater ask to fulfill those needs. It would look like extensions of project period through June 30th of 2025. Also worth noting that grantees are not required to ask for additional money. It's possible that they have, the 2 grantees that are going through December 31st of this year have enough funding that maybe they want to stretch, and so they might just need an extension of their project period. In terms of estimated timeline, these are very general estimates, but it would look like the CJC developing and rolling out a short form application of some sort, something that doesn't really have a lot of administrative burden on folks. and or asking for a carryover exercise, which is kind of a fun term that just means, hey, grantee, how much do you think you need for this additional year? And how much do you currently have left over? And we'll, take the difference and that will be your award. So what that would look like is the grant advisory committee recommending we approve up to X amount, for these grantees, but we know that they may come in lower. We would need a review and decision of those short form applications or requests from you all, the grant advisory committee, in early June, if we opened that short form stuff up in May. And then we'd be ready to take this to the commission at the June 26th meeting for actual authorization of funds. And it would be a relatively smooth process after that because it'd be amendments to existing contracts. We would not have to go under a new contracting process. For your consideration, what would we do with leftover money? $4 million for 1 year. We very may well see that there is money left over, that maybe the grantees don't need $4 million for that additional 12-month period. Would you want to look into a supplemental round, maybe at the beginning of the year, for 6 months of like expansion of scopes of work or like extra capacity building, really an innovation round? Or would you want to consider opening it to new applicants in some capacity, which is my next bit. The second option here is prioritizing existing programs and opening to new applicants for planning grants. So the first bit of this is kind of approving up to X amount that would be available to current grantees and everything that was kind of on the previous slide. But then there would also be a part where you'd approve up to X amount available to new applicants for 6th or 9-month planning grants. So these wouldn't be grants for like fully operational programs, but instead an opportunity for folks who need some time and funds to just sit with their communities and figure out what restorative justice would look like there. Planning grants can be a great opportunity for folks to take that time and have it be with paid. So an estimated timeline for that would be, we would need to initiate tribal consultation. It would basically trigger a critical event, meaning a new funding opportunity for tribes. And tribal consultation could take up to a couple of months. So I wanted to note that. We also would need to develop a competitive, process for an application for those planning grants. And so you would kind of have a staggered timeline, if you will, of you have the existing grantees and their amendment process and everything I talked about on that previous slide. And then with this other pot of money, a kind of semi-slower process. And for that reason, it's a 6th or a 9-month planning grant. I couldn't do a full year just because of the consideration of the process. And wanted to highlight for your consideration as a short project period again. So not really available for, full operational programs to conceptualize. And then the last option here is a blank slate. It's a little radical, but wanted to have it be an option for you all to see and consider. This would be a new competitive application process for everyone. We would need to initiate tribal consultation. We would have a 45-day minimum for an application period, as is CJC policy, 10 business days for protest period. We would need your review and decisions and recommendations to the commission authorization, a contracting process. It's all possible. However, for your consideration is the existing grantees and their funding that is coming to an end. The fact that this would indeed be a longer process, cutting into that, limited length of a project period. So I know that was so fast, but I want to be mindful. We have about 12 minutes left for your discussion. So I welcome Grant Advisory Committee members now to take yourselves off mute, discuss, feel free to ask me questions, but I'm passing it to you all.
Well, this is Elaine. Wow, wild. And this is a really crazy way to stabilize programming, just this sort of in and out, in and out, in and out funding. So I'm sure everybody is kind of feeling that, but it's also awesome that there's money to spend. My thought is that given the timeline and given the kind of creativity out there in the world, that it would make sense to do a mixed approach. And the one thing that's missing from this presentation, I don't know if it's possible to, I mean, we can't get it today, but at some point it'd be really nice to have a report on how the programs are doing and whether they're meeting their goals and objectives, so that the refunding and refresh of funding is kind of going along with some effectiveness. So I'll stop there.
Yeah, thanks for that, Elaine. We did publish a report in September of 2023. There's one that's annually, as required by the legislature. That one's available on our website on the Restorative Justice program page and dives into what the programs are doing. As far as an in-depth evaluation of meeting programs goals, the data piece I think would be the most telling. And we are still working with grantees to get data. Simon, I see your hands raised.
Yeah, hey folks, and thanks everyone and CJC staff for putting that together. I think I echo Elaine, just to keep this short. I think the option 2 seems the best, most fairest, equitable. There, I feel that there is a strong priority to, if they are interested in continuing, which I think most would be, but for the existing programs, as the initial funding was really about developing new ideas and concepts, and we're moving a lot of them into that kind of delivery stage, and still remaining open to proposals from new programs. I personally really like how you framed it as planning grants. I think it would be setting some new organizations at projects kind of almost a too big a hurdle to require that they get something up and running and delivering outcomes within a 9-month period. And we saw that was actually a real challenge with some of the initial funding. I think some sort of, I don't know, too great, or some expectations that when you're trying to stand up a new program, it takes longer to start getting the referrals and getting those processes in place. But it sets it up nicely that existing programs could stabilize, grow, whatever their proposals might be, get some new, there has been a huge amount of interest across the RJ community about seeing these new programs develop. So therefore, I think it's inspired some new communities to think of some ideas they want to put forward. So I think I would urge us to make that opportunity to those communities to propose some ideas. I don't quite know how we would decide how much goes to exist, how we divvy that up, and is it something that could be answered after the existing programs put in their continuation requests and we see, quote, what's left over, or does that have to be a little bit identified ahead of time to meet some of the timescales you've mentioned here?
Yeah, great question, Simon. So I would have a staff recommendation for you today, basically crunching the numbers behind the scenes, to get folks 12 additional months, the existing grantees, 12 additional months, plus a little 10% wiggle room for inflation and what have you. And then also considering that some of those grantees are now in a different phase. They're no longer planning. So boosting those up to what we think, an RJ program might need if they're operational. It looks like a little over 2 million. So my recommendation as staff would be maybe do 3 million for existing grantees, 1 million for planning grants. That seems like it's a little bit arbitrary, but kind of an even split that would definitely take into account that existing grantees might have bigger asks this time around. And then it would be an up to amount to answer your second part question of, hey, if if the grantees only need 2.5 million, then 1.5 million would be available for those planning grants. And that was something that we would work with grantees one-on-one over the coming month to determine what their needs are, having you all approved up to X amount.
Thanks.
Vanessa, I believe your hand was up next, and Tristan.
Yeah, I really liked the option 2 as well, and particularly for the planning grants piece of it. I've heard from so many folks across Oregon around how excited they are to think about restorative justice in this way. And it's particular, I think, in a lot of the BIPOC communities, wanting to have time to build collaborations with other organizations. I'm really excited about the planning grants.
Thanks, Vanessa, for your comment. I appreciate that. We have just about 5 minutes left of this meeting, so I want to be mindful. Tristan, I see your hands raised. It does sound like we're getting some sort of consensus of maybe looking at the second option, but Tristan, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I also agree with that. I like the second option. The blank slate option makes me nervous just because I know that funding is running out for a lot of programs, and most of these programs are housed in pretty small places that don't kind of have the ability to, you know, cover some costs for a period of time. So it could potentially, you know, risk losing some programs if we went with the blank slate in that timeline. The only other thing that I was going to say is I also think it's a good idea to do consultation with tribal government, especially since our only tribal grantee ended up returning the funds. And so I would love for, you know, there to be that outreach that happens so that folks are aware. And I'm supportive of the planning grant. Part of me thinks that, you know, since that timeline is going to take a lot longer to get to, you know, considering new applications, that it may be worthwhile to like encourage a planning grant, but also allow for programs that are a little bit further along in their planning, since maybe folks are starting that thought process now. But if we're going to just allocate that $1 million, then that might be difficult to allow for, you know, fully fledged programs. But I would just, yeah, I guess make a consideration about not necessarily making it that restrictive.
Thanks for your comments, Tristan. Are there any grant advisory committee members that have concerns or, you know, do not want to consider kind of this consensus towards that option 2 in the middle, prioritizing existing program and open to new planning grants? Okay, hearing none. So it does sound like we have consensus as a path forward. That's great. And then let's see what this would look like. Is we would need to decide some number that would be up to an amount for those existing grantees, and then, you know, for consideration could be with any money that's left over, it could go to the planning grant pot. Pun not intended, but I realize that there are pots on the screen. So, or, you know, maybe some sort of additional supplemental round for existing grantees or combination. What those particulars, I guess, don't need to be decided today, but the general amount that's available would be. Does anyone have any concerns as to that $3 million amount that I tossed around earlier? Elaine.
Well, just that it sounded like there were some differences in the needs that the different projects had. So I don't know if that's just something we get to talk about at a future meeting, but sort of figuring out. The other thing is really the planning grant. Clearly, if people get accepted to do a planning project and we get funding again, those folks get put in a nice position to continue forward. So I don't want to miss the reality that we, you know, that it's hard to make that equitable over time if we keep doing it this way, you know. So I guess I'm interested in seeing how to get the most planning processes for funded so that we have a nice range of participation in the planning grants, because it does give you an advantage going forward. I also worry about sustainability over time, but it's hard to know how to think about that. So I also wonder about sort of the uptake of self-sustaining work. Is that a year out? Is that 2 years out, where we start to see people taper their need for this funding because they've built something more sustainable? So do we look at an amount where we begin to taper off of the original grantees as we begin to fund more robustly the ones coming in? So those are just general things, but it does affect the idea of how much we want to put in the planning grant versus how much we want to put into the continuation of funding. And I don't have enough information to know how to do that math.
Thanks for your comments, Elaine. Aaron, your hand's raised also.
Yeah, I mean, to Elaine, to your point, I just hope at some point we can get off of an annual allocation spin cycle, because it makes it impossible for organizations to do planning. I know that's not the CJC's fault. That was but the long-term solution here is to have larger allocation periods and not do this one-year thing. That said, the real missing piece for me is we have 2 participants that went from planning to full, right? Do we have even preliminary estimates for what they're asking for? Because, that could be a fairly significant expense jump up for them to go to operationality from planning. And that's the only thing I'm worried about, is we have no idea what they're going to ask for.
You are correct, Aaron. And we do not have those numbers. This all came out just last month, and trying to get a decision before we started asking questions to grantees. So with our calculations, it looked like a little over that $2 million number, considering that some had significant jumps, but to build in a buffer, knowing that, like you said, that they likely will be even greater than we anticipated, as well as the existing programs who maybe, had other things change as well. That's where my 3 million is coming from. So I do want to acknowledge that it is 1 o'clock, and I know we have a few people jumping off. I'm so sorry that this is a whiplash meeting, and thank you all for, taking part. I feel we have a strong consensus for this middle route. We will move forward with that. Is there anyone who, feels strongly against the 3 million, up to 3 million for existing and 1 million for the planning grants? Speak now. Okay. And so then I guess before I let you all go, next steps, the commission's meeting at the end of May. We'll update them as to what came out of today and the process that we're getting out. We'll also be reaching out to grantees to let them know what's happening. And then we'll begin developing some sort of planning grant RFGP or application while we initiate tribal consultation to assess the needs of the tribes for that. I imagine that we will have another grant advisory committee meeting sometime maybe mid-May to kind of just give you all an update on this process, and then a decision meeting, some review of applications from the existing grantees of what their requests were in early June, so that we can hand those off to the commission for authorization at their June 26th meeting, which will hopefully, I know it's a really tight timeline, but get, the 10-day DAS processing time to get their disbursements out the door for July, so that those existing programs don't have a huge lag in their next disbursement of funding. Are there any questions for me?
Just, I'm assuming that if the requests come in at less than $3 million, that difference would go to the planning grant pool. Is that correct?
We could discuss that in May if you'd prefer. So option 1, yes, it goes up to the planning grant pool. Option 2, we do a supplemental round for existing grantees, maybe a few months down the line, saying like, hey, you got this amount. Now that you're, 3 or 4 or 6 months down, do you need more? So I guess we could discuss that in May, Elaine.
That was some
Okay.
awesome time
Oh.
management,
Yeah,
Casey.
thank you so much.
Oh, thanks so much, guys. I appreciate it. That I thank you for being here. Thank you for pitching in. And take care, everyone.